Hey everyone, welcome back to The Tent, your place for politics, policy, and progress. I'm Daniela Gibbs-Leger.
And I'm Colin Seaberger. Daniela, have you heard about the beef between Drake and Kendrick?
Yeah, I'm only a little bit obsessed with it.
Where'd you fall down?
I fall down in that no one should ever try to beef with Kendrick Lamar. You're going to lose. And not only going to lose,
Massively?
yeah, massively, spectacularly, oh my goodness. If I'm Drake, I'm leaving the country. I guess going back to Canada, and I'm never coming back.
Yeah, I think that's right. I'm not even sure, why we're even calling this a beef, because pretty much everybody I know all agrees that Drake got totally served.
He got eviscerated, and the last song, I think it's the last one that Kendrick put out, it's like the song of the summer almost. It's
Yeah.
Oh, you guys want something to dance to?
Let's
Here you
do
go.
it. Let's do it.
A danceable beef. We appreciate.
We absolutely do.
Well, politics this week is almost looking tame in comparison.
Almost.
Well, at any rate, I heard you did have a great interview this week.
I did. I chatted with Lindsey McLendon, Senior Fellow for Criminal Justice Reform at the Center for American Progress Action Fund. We talked about public safety in America, including, crime trends, drivers, and evidence-based solutions to make our communities more safe.
I know it's definitely an issue that's top of mind for a lot of people.
For sure. I mean, everybody in America cares about the safety of their communities. So it was a really great conversation, and can't wait for you to hear it.
Great. But first, we've got to get to some news. And
We do.
I hate to say it, but we have to talk about Trump this week, Colin.
Unfortunately, we do, Daniela. So last week, we revisited the January 6th insurrection, which was obviously fueled by rampant election denialism. We heard about some of the horrific violence it caused and how it pushed our democracy to the brink in ways that we haven't really seen since the Civil War.
Mm.
Well, you'd think Donald Trump and the other members of the Republican Party, might have learned by now that their words really carry power. And that spreading disinformation and misinformation endangers our democracy and American safety. But, of course, they don't care about any of that. All that they care about is winning and holding on to power by any means necessary. And many of them have made that abundantly clear by refusing to commit to accepting the the results of the election in 2024. Over and over again, Donald Trump and those vying to become his running mate in particular have all declined to say whether they'd accept November's election results. Folks like Senator Tim Scott of South Carolina, Congresswoman Elise Stefanik, Congressman Byron Donalds, and North Dakota Governor Doug Burgum have all dodged questions on this subject in recent days. It's just the latest proof we need that the Republican Party has fully embraced Trump's hostility toward democracy, as well as his penchant for lies and conspiracy theories. It's especially concerning to hear these election denialist narratives ramping up once again since, a third of states out there have someone overseeing elections like a governor or attorney general or secretary of state who openly questions the legitimacy of the last presidential election. Think about, what that means for the next one.
Yes, it is terrifying and something I think about a lot. And of course, in hinting that he may not accept the 2024 election results, Donald Trump has flirted in recent interviews with instigating political violence if he believes the election is somehow unfair. Let's not forget, folks, he said the same type of crap in 2020. So we need to take this threat seriously.
We do.
The 2020 election was one of the most secure in our nation's history, according to Trump's own officials, Republicans, I might add. And yet MAGA extremists fought tooth and nail to overturn the legitimate votes of the American people. Election officials have continued to build off the security successes of 2020. So this talk of quote unquote election security isn't actually about the process or the procedure. It's about perception. MAGA Republicans are starting to lay the groundwork for what may be yet another attempt to undermine or even overturn our free and fair elections. We need to make sure the American people understand that they can and must trust the voting process, and that these narratives are nothing more than tools that MAGA extremists are using for political gain.
Mm-hmm.
And the stakes have never been higher. As the president recently said, this election will be a defining moment in American history. It could very well determine whether America's nearly 250-year democracy crumbles under the weight of MAGA Republican disinformation and violence.
When you put it like that, Daniela, it just really drives home how heavy and scary all this stuff
Yeah.
is. Unfortunately, we have to also talk about another messed up threat from Donald Trump and MAGA Republican land. So the Washington Post actually reported last week that at a recent private dinner at Mar-a-Lago, Donald Trump asked big oil executives to donate a combined $1 billion to his campaign. In exchange, he promised to roll back environmental regulations. I mean, when we've said time and time again that Donald Trump values special interest over, the American people, this is the most obvious example. It doesn't get more crystal clear than this. At a time when we desperately are trying to pull humanity back from the brink of a climate disaster, Trump is openly offering up hundreds of thousands of clean energy jobs and rules that have been put in place to keep us safer and, our planet, more secure in exchange for $1 billion in campaign cash. Congressman Jamie Raskin has, rightly called this a quid pro quo and wants the matter investigated. I actually saw earlier today that it sounds like there are actually going to be congressional hearings on this report, which is very welcome news. It's just abysmal and dangerous, but it's not really surprising, though. Trump has always put a premium on his own personal power than the safety of the American people. I mean, hello, COVID. That said, during his time in office, Trump regularly denied the reality of climate change. He pulled the U.S. out of the Paris Climate Accords, and he killed former President Obama's Clean Power Plan. And he's already planning to push these policies even further if elected to a second term. Trump has said that if he's elected, he'll ramp up oil drilling on public lands and offer tax breaks to big oil companies. He's also promised to gut climate components of the Inflation Reduction Act, such as provisions that encourage the adoption of clean cars and clean energy, which would destroy the domestic manufacturing renaissance that is already underway, thanks to those clean energy initiatives. And he's promised to reverse new life-saving pollution limits, things like, rules to prevent you from being poisoned by lead or PFAS to be in your, forever chemicals to be in your water. So this is exactly, these are exactly the kind of protections that he's offering up, for whoever the highest bidder is. It's, just outrageous that he continues to, kind of distort American politics and policy for his own corrupt means.
Yeah, it's really disturbing, and his plans would be really devastating to the climate movement, especially when we've seen so much progress over the last 3 years under the Biden administration. His plans not only take aim at key environmental regulations, but he'd eliminate the checks and balances that government relies on to function and advance the public interest by gutting the independence of government agencies, including those tasked with, protecting our environment.
Oh,
Yeah, great.
Gee, imagine that.
He'd put those decisions in the hands of the president alone. Terrifying. His allies' radical policy agenda, Project 2025, something you will be hearing us talk a lot about, plans to replace the independent career civil servants, including scientists, at these agencies with political appointees, people who fall in line with the MAGA agenda. And spoiler alert, the MAGA agenda does not include climate action.
Really?
Yeah. Fancy that. Look, if MAGA extremists get their way, agencies like the Environmental Protection Agency or the Department of the Interior, which manages public lands, could be staffed by radical people who don't even think climate change is real. And here's an example of just how devastating that could be. The Federal Trade Commission just found out that Scott Sheffield, the former CEO of an energy company called Pioneer, which was recently acquired by ExxonMobil, colluded with OPEC to curb the supply of oil in order to try and raise prices on gas, diesel, and other products.
So he could make more money.
Exactly. Raise prices on who? Us, the American people, right? This is a really serious abuse of power that has probably directly impacted every American who drives a car. And we rely on agencies like the FTC to regulate these kind of abuses. Project 2025 would turn those agencies into puppets for Donald Trump, the same guy who just asked people like Scott Sheffield to give him $1 billion, as you mentioned, in exchange for favorable policy outcomes. And speaking of abuses, because I'm not done yet, in case you
Go
weren't-
off, Daniela. Go off.
in case you weren't fully convinced that Trump intends to sell off our climate policy to the highest bidder, let me pose this. Jared Kushner's equity firm received $2 billion from Saudi Arabia.
Ooh, that's
With
a lot of money.
B, exactly. Right after the Trump presidency ended. The Saudis are leaders in OPEC, not to mention notorious for sabotaging climate negotiations. For example, at the COP28 climate convention this year, they claimed wind and solar power somehow threaten our global climate. What? And Jared Kushner, son-in-law and advisor to Trump, is in their pockets. It is important for us to understand what each candidate in the 2024 election is planning. And in Donald Trump's case, it's higher gas prices for the American people and a complete elimination of environmental protections and regulations, an effective end to climate policy altogether.
It's chilling, Daniela. Or maybe it's warming if Trump gets his way.
Hey, that was funny. Good dad joke, but also very dark.
Thank you, Daniela. I know. Well, that's all the time that we have. I'm out of dad jokes. If there's anything else you'd like us to cover on the pod, hit us up on Twitter at the Tent Pod. That's at the Tent Pod. And stick around for my interview with Lindsey McLendon in just a beat. Lindsey Carlson McLendon is a senior fellow for criminal justice reform at the Center for American Progress Action Fund. She previously served as deputy director with the Black Women Forward Action Fund, where she helps support Black women working to change the criminal legal system. Prior to that, she served as director of research and senior legal counsel with The Appeal, and also worked for the Pew Charitable Trust Public Safety Performance Project. Lindsey, thanks so much for joining us on The Tent.
Glad to be here, Colin. Thanks for having me.
So, you just authored a report with our friends at the Center for American Progress about crime in the United States. Can you talk a little bit about what crime trends are looking like right now? Obviously, coming out of the pandemic, we saw things, really surge in 2020 under the last year of Donald Trump's presidency. What are things like today? How have things changed?
Yeah, you're right. So there was a really big homicide spike in 2020, and crimes fluctuated a little bit since then. But what we're seeing today is actually quite encouraging. In 2023, there was a likely historic drop in murder, and 2024, early signs of 2024 is that murder is continuing to decline all across the country, not just in a few cities. And then we're also seeing property crime and violent crime generally go down. So, definitely heading in what we hope is the right direction.
We absolutely love to hear that. Since we're in an election year, can you talk a little bit about how voters are perceiving the differences between the political parties and the vision that they're offering on the issue of public safety? Who do they trust more? Are those perceptions necessarily accurate? And what do you think is shaping or informing those opinions?
Yeah, well, first of all, it's important to recognize that voters don't actually think that crime is going down, right? And in fact, they increasingly think it's going up. So
you're saying there's a disconnect between the data and what voters are actually thinking reality is.
That's right. But it's fair to say that over the past few years, crime has been a legitimate concern, as there have been legitimate increases. And even though it's going down, voters aren't seeing it that way. So they're really looking to see from any of their elected officials, right, that a sense that their public safety is meaningful to their elected leaders, that their leaders care, and that they're responsive to their crime concerns to begin with, right? And so going back to your question about what they think about Republicans and Democrats, well, it's not great for Democrats right now. Right now, they are quite behind in terms of voters' perceptions on which party is better at crime and public safety. Generally, voters trust Democrats a little bit less to care about public safety, but then also to have solutions to improve it.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's fascinating given the fact that we're seeing Republicans on Capitol Hill put forward a budget plan that would actually gut like one of the primary programs to help localities actually be able to hire police officers. We have seen, the Biden administration through the American Rescue Plan provide resources to local police departments to be able to hire, train, retain officers on the beat and support things like community violence intervention programs that are really important for stopping crimes from happening before they even do, right? So it seems like there's this disconnect between what the policies Republicans are proposing, what the policies Democrats have championed, and the data is beginning to show, are quite effective. And so I'm curious to, though, zero in on this question about guns, though. We know that guns are playing kind of an increasing role if you look at violent crimes, right? They're actually playing an increasing aggravating role in undermining public safety. Can you talk a little bit about, what types of gun reforms the evidence suggests would actually address violent crime? And can you talk about, pushback we've seen on these solutions from Republicans? Are they paying any consequence for standing in the way, either pushing these radical proposals or undermining efforts to address them?
Yeah, so you're spot on that while Republicans seem to have a better public perception around crime and their ability to address it, quite frankly, the solutions on offer have almost little to no impact on improving safety and actually can worsen it. So to your point about guns, um, we're still piecing it together, right? What happened in 2020 and caused such a high spike in homicide. But we know one of the drivers was a huge increase in gun sales and the proliferation of guns, right? Especially in the hands of people who want to use them for violence. And so trying to adopt solutions, generally they're going to be at the state level, right? Trying to adopt solutions that would limit access to guns by people who want to use them to cause harm, but also, people who just shouldn't have them, like children, right? And also trying to, I think, tamp down a little bit on just the numbers of guns available, and which can be then the higher numbers of gun you have, the more likely they are to be stolen and trafficked, right? And then used for illegal purposes. So there are the report that we did featured a number of solutions that would help do that. One of them is making sure that you're safely storing your guns, right? So that they're both kept out of the hands of kids, and they're also kept out of the hands of people who would use them to, commit violence, right?
Sure.
And stealing them. When I spoke with the Milwaukee mayor recently, he said one challenge they're seeing is that people come to the city and they bring their guns with them and they don't store them properly in their cars. Their cars get broken into, guns stolen, and probably off to be used for not a good purpose, right?
Sure. These things just kind of
Yeah.
layer on to one another in terms
Right.
of aggravating
Right.
of levels of crime, the proliferation of incidents. So that definitely makes a lot of sense. You talked about your report. I think a key thing that you underline there is there are really these two different strategies to fight crime. One is accountability, and two is prevention. What do each of these two strategies entail, and how are they different? And why do we really need both of them in order to actually achieve true public safety?
Right. So the report is titled Improving Public Safety Through Better Accountability and Prevention because it recognizes that right now we need a two-pronged approach, right? So people can't be allowed to go and harm others with impunity, right? But accountability, we talk about a lot about changing the way we think about accountability because we mostly we mostly think of it as a form of punishment that almost never helps anybody change direction. It doesn't repair harm to victims. So we talk about accountability in a broader way that will improve accountability, improve the rate at which people are being identified for causing harm because the solve rates of crimes are incredibly low.
So crimes happen and basically they're never solved. Is that what you're suggesting?
Right. And across the board, murder actually has some of the highest solve rates, and that's less than 50% across the nation.
Wow.
Right. So you have, and then property crime is somewhere around 13% solve rate. So you just have a lot of things happening that are people are not being held accountable for. But in part, it's because a small number of people drive serious crime, right? So
Sure.
there's these cycles of violence and networks of violence that continue, sort of unabated when crime's not solved. But then also there are a lot of other things we need to do to improve the way we hold people accountable so that we get them off the track of reoffending, right? So that we're reducing future crime. We don't want, there are a lot of underlying issues that can drive the choice to commit a crime, right?
Sure.
Call it a choice, but can drive criminal activity. And so addressing those underlying issues as well, like making sure that the way we hold people accountable stops the cycle of offending. That's really the core. But then simultaneously, we've got to be investing in the things we know that prevent crime to begin with. And this is something that's going to create a lot longer lasting safety, right? If you're investing in the people and the institutions that create safety and the neighborhoods who've been disinvested, crime is going to become less prevalent, and because it's just not an interesting option. It's not available to people who otherwise right now might be, suffering from scarcity or caught up in cycles of violence. Prevention is a really core piece to this.
So you're saying that Republican efforts to defund things like helping people be able to get substance use treatment is not actually going to promote public safety.
Right. No, stripping the resources from the communities that need them the most won't do anything for anyone's safety, right? But I will say that, the Biden administration has been really great at making sure that communities are getting the kind of resources they need for things like community violence interruption strategies. And a lot of people don't know what that means, but it's simply this. You have people who are rooted in the community who engage with others who may be at risk of violence, either because they themselves have been traumatized, something's happened to them, they're in a scarce position. So they engage with them and try to help improve their circumstances, help them, get a job or have access to the kind of resources that prevent violent crime. And that is much, much, much more effective than simply responding and reacting to crime, right? So the funds under the American Rescue Plan have been instrumental in helping improve that in cities across the country. And I do believe that's a big part of why we're seeing, especially in the larger cities that have embraced those strategies, we're seeing crime reductions.
That's great. So I have to ask you, police play a key role both in preventing crime, before it happens, as well as holding criminals accountable. Can you, speak to the fact that, though we've seen in recent years that they aren't always reliable in actually dealing justly with different types of communities? Can you talk about some of the reforms your team suggested in the report that you released about, how we can have, more accountability, in a way that's more equitable and more just?
Yeah, absolutely. So police continue to be well respected and popular across demographics, but we also see high appetite for reform, right? For the changing of the way that police engage with communities, especially Black communities who have historically been over-policed, subject to over-enforcement and over-incarceration. So a couple of things. One, we propose several strategies to change the way that police interact with the public, right? Instead of treating the public as, an enemy that they have to be on guard against, they're, instead taking care of the communities and they're engaging with people respectfully. We also talk about emphasizing community and police collaborations a lot more robustly. So community organizations tend to be as invested in their own safety, right, as anyone else. And so
Sure, they're on the front lines, right?
And so working with police to, instead of just sort of cast a broad net of enforcement strategies, right, to do a lot more preventive engagement. And then, quite frankly, we need to reject these strategies that rely on police violence first and foremost, right? So the kinds of things that, chokeholds and no-knock warrants and all of that kind of like actual policing tactics, they need to be minimized as much as possible and banned as much as possible. But then we also need to try to find, I would say, training strategies, but also close collaboration with the communities who are suffering most from crime to help map out what they want, right? What are they looking for from the police, right? What is it that they would like to see different from law enforcement? And so maybe making sure that those communities are at the center of any kind of policing strategy.
That's interesting. Your report suggests a number of different really exciting policies and potential reforms. Which ones are you most optimistic that we may actually be able to get done in the next few years? And, why is now the time to act on these policies? We talked about like the changing crime landscape. Why is now the time that policymakers should be looking at making some of these changes?
Yeah, so I think I'm pretty optimistic that one thing that we could work to improve immediately is improving our crime clearance rates, because there's a robust set of evidence pointing to how law enforcement can do that, and not just focusing on, for example, homicides, but on non-fatal shootings. It's a matter of increasing the time and attention that law enforcement are giving to each individual case. Denver proved really great results when they dedicated a detective unit just to solving non-fatal shootings. And that also helps reduce that sort of cycle of violence, right? Going back to that notion that a few people are driving the majority of serious crime. Well, if you're, sort of getting at the root of who's causing or who's shooting, right? Then you might be able to prevent further shootings.
Makes sense.
And so the strategies are known. You don't have to increase a lot of resources to get it done. You just have to shift your resources towards doing that. So I'm optimistic that could make a big difference. It also helps, I think, build community confidence that police care, right? That they're there to help, not to enforce, but that they care about people who've been harmed. I'm also optimistic that because we're seeing some of these changes most recently in Maryland, that we can do better to support victims, people who've been subject to violence.
What does that look like?
So what Maryland recently did is they changed their victim compensation law to make sure that there are a greater number of resources available for victims, because I think it's approximately 96% of victims never receive any financial assistance at all. They don't,
Wow.
it's a hard system to navigate. They don't know what's available to them. They don't understand. There are a lot of exclusions, unnecessary exclusions. And folks who've been exposed to violence often become involved in violence again later in their life. So, getting them the resources they need early on, and just expanding the pool of people that we make those resources available to, I think could have a pretty immediate impact, and we could do it pretty immediately.
Well, that is an optimistic note that I will be happy to conclude our conversation on. Lindsey McLendon, it was so great to have you on.
Thanks so much, Colin. It was great to be here.
As always, thanks for listening. Be sure to go back and check out previous episodes. Before we go, Colin, I feel like there's something you want to talk about.
Daniela, I have to get it off my chest. I am obsessed with the new Wicked movie trailer that came out this week.
Yes.
I literally, I immediately watched it and I was just overcome with emotion because it has taken 15 years since they started talking about producing this movie to finally get to this point. And this was the first extended trailer that they've released. It's about 3.5 minutes or so. And I cannot underscore enough how beautiful it looks, how incredible the acting appears that it's going to be. The music sounds great. The sets are gorgeous. I'm so excited. And I know what I will be doing this year on Thanksgiving. That's going to go see Wicked.
So I will confess that I have not seen the musical.
Daniela!
I know, and I am someone who likes musicals, but I've just never gotten around to seeing this one. I will see it at some point, but I am excited for the movie as well.
Well, I think that means that the tent needs to go on the road to Broadway.
I'm sure we can get that approved.
Yes, I'm sure. Well, there's also going to be a few of our favorites in there. I know You like Cynthia Erivo. I adore Jonathan Bailey. So
did you say Jonathan Bailey?
I did say Jonathan Bailey. So I had to work that in.
Okay.
So I'm super stoked. Ariana Grande, I was extremely skeptical when she was cast as Glinda, but just absolutely floored me in the trailer. It's like, I don't know what it is, but she just so perfectly embodies the character. So I'm stoked.
All right. Well, I am happy that you were stoked. I'm going to check out the trailer. But speaking of Jonathan Bailey,
What do you got?
something else is happening this week.
Oh,
New
what?
season of Bridgerton.
Oh, yes.
Yes.
I've heard.
You've heard season 3. I was less than excited to like see Penelope and Colin's story because I really like the other brother and I'm like, do him first. But all the trailers have just, I'm so excited. Like, I cannot wait. I'm gonna try not to binge it all at once. Like, I want to savor it like a meal, like take my time.
Do they release all the episodes?
They're gonna
at once?
drop
Yeah.
the first half this week, and then
Okay.
I think in June they drop the second half
Oh.
all at once.
Well, that's good. You get to kind of like, self-ration a little bit.
Exactly. And we know how I feel about Jonathan Bailey.
Well, that is certainly true. But it's also good because I don't know about you, but like, I got lots of limits on my time during the week and on the weekends for all my sports watching right now.
Yes.
I've got the Rangers and the Stars, still battling it out in the NHL playoffs. I've got the Knicks are, kind of their own melodrama that's happening over the course of the past week. Losing by 35 points or so this past weekend after winning the first few games. Like, it's too much.
It's a lot.
Not only are you keeping me up until like after midnight, which is a lot for a parent with a 2-year-old, but you're also putting us through this roller coaster of emotion.
It's too much stress. Although the game this week, like the Knicks were back, baby.
Yes.
Like they did very well.
They delivered.
I forget if Boston in their series, if they're up like 1 or
The Bruins?
2. No,
No.
back to basketball.
Okay.
Because basically my husband will only root for the Knicks if they're playing the Celtics.
Oh.
Yeah, because he just has like this irrational hate for like New York teams. And I'm like, oh, is it because you hate like winning? So I want the Knicks and Boston to play because it's always a great match when those teams play. Because I want to force my husband to root for the New York Knickerbockers. Speaking of my husband, it's our 20th wedding anniversary today.
Hey! Congratulations!
Thank
Happy
you.
anniversary.
So happy anniversary, babe.
You got a good one.
Thank you, Colin. All right. Well, on that note, let us take our leave. That sounds like I could be in Bridgerton with that, right?
You could.
Yes, it could. I just rewatched season 2, so. Anyway, y'all take care of yourselves, and we'll talk to you next week. The Tent is a podcast from the Center for American Progress Action Fund. It's hosted by me, Daniella Gibbs-Leger, and co-hosted by Colin Seaberger. Aaron Phillips is our lead producer. Kelly McCoy is our supervising producer. Mishka Espy is our booking producer, and Muggs Leone is our digital producer. Hi Fan, Matthew Gossage, Olivia Mowry, and Tony Pandolfo are our video team. You can find us on YouTube, Apple, Spotify, Google Play, or wherever you get your podcasts.